So considering I did a preview video on this last week, I definitely wanted to take a minute to talk about Claressa Shields taking apart Nikki Adler in a fifth round TKO destruction. Basically, she completely obliterated Adler, managed to win the WBC and the vacant IBF World Female Super Middleweight Championships, and she's now a unified titleist. Only 4 fights in. Very impressive stuff. This is definitely the most impressive win of her career. I mean, not only because she was fighting an undefeated champion, but she was fighting in very fine form. Basically the best that I've seen her look. I mean, even better than her 2 Olympic runs in 2012 and 2016. She was putting together her punches really nicely. She wasn't really rushing her work. Wasn't smothering herself or anything, and she was doing really good. She was picking her spots, picking and choosing exactly when to kind of shoot forward and throw her combinations. But she was a lot more controlled in throwing her combinations as opposed to some of her past fights where she just kind of let leather fly, and some of her technique kind of suffered to a degree because of it, as well as potentially even the power. Just simply because of the fact that she's not like shooting those shots with each one with intention and with force, as opposed to throwing them just kind of wildly at like all over the place. It works for some fighters, but for others maybe not so much. And for her, it didn't seem like it was working quite as well. Here, when she kind of pick and chose her spots, it worked really, really nicely. Went in there, pretty much didn't allow Adler to get anything off. Adler may have touched her once or twice here and there, but other than that, Shields pretty much outworked her, outfought her, outpunched her, outboxed her, out everything her. She just bullied Adler, beat her up, broke her down, and broke her to pieces and took her belts along the way. And interestingly enough, there live in the audience was a potential future opponent for her, at the very least a near rival for Claressa Shields, probably for the near future, Christina Hammer, who is a unified champion as well, at middleweight, however, not at super middleweight. She's the WBO and the WBC female middleweight champion, and so she's basically the best fighter of the females at middleweight. She's fairly tall for that weight as well. She's 5'11", or at least tall in comparison to Shields, who, even though she's a super middleweight, she's the bigger woman in there, is only 5'8". So interestingly enough, Hammer will have a height and most likely a reach advantage as well. Shields, after all, her name is T-Rex because of the fact that she doesn't have the longest reach in the world. Although I wouldn't say that her 68-inch reach is necessarily like short. It's not like her, she's like stubby armed or anything like that. But she's somebody that likes to fight it out a bit on the inside, cut the distance most certainly, and she'll probably have to do that against somebody like Hammer. Not sure if that fight will happen next necessarily, but depending on exactly what Hammer's obligations are. In terms of things like mandatories, I wouldn't be surprised to see a fight like that happen. The thing about Shields, about female boxing in general, and especially female boxing kind of at the higher weight classes, like above lightweight pretty much, is the talent pool isn't necessarily the deepest. So with Shields, in a way, she's kind of filling a niche of a niche. So she is kind of where Layla Ali was at years ago, where Mia St. John was at, where Christy Martin was at, where she's going to be the draw in pretty much every fight that she has. And so her opponent, her opponents are all pretty much going to be underdogs going into the fights for the most part, unless they have kind of shown something like in terms of like otherworldly skill, simply because of the fact that Shields is almost like the big fish in the small pond, as it is generally, like in terms of her name value, her 2 gold medals. I mean, her pretty much almost perfect amateur career outside of one loss that she managed to avenge. And I think that loss was back when she was like 16 or something crazy. So she hasn't lost in years, and it was when she was a kid, basically. At least legally speaking, I guess, the way that you put it. Some people consider the fact that teenagers are almost adults, and especially in female sports generally, like you'll occasionally see like a female golfer or a female tennis player that's still in their teens that's able to compete and defeat women much older than themselves. I think even like the Williams sisters kind of first jumped onto the scene and blew up when they were still in their teens, incidentally. But getting back to the fact of the matter here. Shields, pretty much she's going to be favored over everybody that she fights, and I think rightfully so. Not simply just because of the fact that she has a bit of a reputation behind her, but because that was a very deserved and earned reputation. And even as a pro now, she's starting to build a bit of a rep as well. I guess for what it's worth, though, somebody like Hammer is a bit more experienced, at the very least in the pro game. She has been a pro since 2009, so she has years more experience than Shields in the professional ranks in terms of being able to go what for the females is the 10-round distance, the 10-round championship distance, as opposed to the 12-round distance, and 2-minute rounds, of course, and as opposed to 3. But you know, outside of that, Shields, especially in the early rounds at the very least, until we see her like truly tested beyond, say 5 or 6 rounds. I think the furthest that Shields has gone was 8 in her fight just before the Adler fight. So who knows? Maybe she could possibly have some weaknesses that could be exposed a bit later by somebody such as Hammer, or maybe like somebody like Anne-Sophie Mathis, who's another like higher level female fighter out there. I mean, otherwise for Shields, at super middleweight, there's not necessarily like a bunch of just like absolute like hard hitting killer names necessarily. I'd imagine probably the 2 top potential opponents for her, if she's not going to fight any of the champions coming up in weight. There's Tori Nelson, who's a woman that's 16-0 with 3 draws, and she is actually the Universal Boxing Federation super middleweight champion for the females, of course, and the Women's International Boxing Association super middleweight champion. So she has a couple of belts there. And the thing is with female boxing, it's a little bit different. I'm not sure if like which other organizations are necessarily like considered like the best of the best, but at the very least I do think that there are some that may not necessarily exist insofar as significance on the male side of things. So that's where somebody like Nelson would come in. Another potential opponent I could potentially see for her is Maricela Cornejo, woman that's 7-2. BoxRec incidentally lists her as the second or as the 3rd best fighter at super middleweight for the females, and I haven't necessarily seen her yet. Should she potentially get a shot, I would definitely check out some footage of her, just as I would anybody, in doing my kind of due diligence and being sure that I can somewhat gauge exactly what to expect with regards to any fight. Any championship fight, the way that I see it is, people should be aware of who these kind of contenders and prospects are on the come up, and especially some of these title challengers that may somewhat come out of nowhere, but usually there's footage of somebody here and there. It's a little bit more difficult, I think, probably for the females, because they don't get televised as frequently, whereas with the males, even if they're from relatively obscure countries or what have you, they usually have been televised at some point if they've managed to fight for some sort of like minor belt or a ranking belt, something like that. But I mean, that's pretty much all that to say that Shields did a very good job. She's 4-0. Not exactly sure what the future is gonna entail for her. It's an interesting case, because like I said, she's kind of in a niche position with regard to what female boxing is and what it can be. Like I said before, with the names I mentioned previously, Layla Ali, Mia St. John, Christy Martin, they did manage to build pretty nice careers for themselves, nice followings for themselves, nice earnings for themselves. So I could very well see Shields kind of following in the footsteps of them in a way. And who knows, maybe she'll wind up fighting a lot of women that are a bit more well known, even like say from the UFC side of things. Maybe they'll cross over into boxing in order to try and get a shot at somebody like Shields, especially considering the fact that the UFC, I think, only goes up to 145 pounds for the females. So if there's people out there like Chris Cyborg or thereabouts, like in terms of like her size, because she's a fairly large woman, she's somebody that even cuts to make 145. And incidentally, there's actually footage of her sparring against Shields. Shields giving her the work, but Cyborg isn't just a boxer. She's more of a kickboxing specialist in mixed martial arts. So there it is. But Shields is definitely favored over pretty much everybody out there. You know, she's probably not going to lose for a good while until, who knows, maybe like her interest in the sport will wane at some point. But she's still young. She still has the hunger and the fire about her, and it's gonna be I think it'll be pretty fun to see exactly how she does, because I do think that you know, even though women's boxing may not necessarily be everybody's cup of tea, when it's presented and when it's presented properly, and when it's presented with you know, good matchups at the very least, usually you'll find some pretty interesting action. You know, I think, you know, at least there'll be two people fighting it out for the most part. Even though, at least in this case, Adler didn't necessarily pull her weight of making the fight. Not even necessarily competitive, but at least, you know, putting up a fight and kind of going out on her shield in really trying to put it all on the line. She just completely got washed over, and that was all there was to it. So hopefully Shields doesn't fall prey to all of her opponents being so overwhelmed, and, you know, not at least giving her and giving the public, giving us the fans and pundits and such, a little bit of drama. A little bit of drama and excitement, as Prince Nassim once said. But that's going to do it for this one. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.